Thank you very much for that, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show. And today we have two of the regular panelists, Concordance, but also someone that I feel I owe a deep apology to, due to the insightful brilliance and genius of one YouTube user named Jason Burns. It has come to my attention that I have been pronouncing Aaron's name incorrectly for the last 3 years. His real name apparently is AronRa. So, welcome to the show, AronRa and Concordance.
Yeah.
What else can you say, AronRa? What an exciting time it is. I don't know whether people watching are sports fans, but we're obviously in the middle of the Olympics, and I have to say I am just so totally engrossed in it. When I'm sitting at my desk, I have both computers on, with different channels showing different sporting events, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. And of course, congratulations to the United States for leading the medal table. Then comes China, and then, would you believe it, United Kingdom, or Great Britain, in third place. It's absolutely fantastic.
Cheaters. Sorry.
We'll lose the drug tests are done. Very quickly, a few announcements, and then we'll get on with the show. I want to give another shout out for the MSF Doctors Without Borders charity event, which will be taking place over the weekend of the 8th and 9th of September. Particularly if you have any items that you would like to offer up for auction on the eBay auction, please send an email to msfebay at ymail.com. I will actually put that, actually no one signed in. I'll try and put that email address above the chat so you can make a note of it. Let's get going. I want to thank Non-Stamp Collector he was on the show a couple of weeks ago and brought my attention to this book, Lost Christianities. And I'm just going to read the first chapter. Excuse me, old age, I have to change glasses. This first chapter, first paragraph.
Thank you.
Lead into a segue into a story that Concordance is going to give us. But I think this is an interesting point. It begins, it may be difficult to imagine a religious phenomenon more diverse than modern-day Christianity. There are Roman Catholic missionaries in developing countries who devote themselves to voluntary poverty for the sake of others, and evangelical tele-evangelists who run 12-step programs to ensure financial success. There are New England Presbyterians and Appalachian snake handlers. There are Greek Orthodox priests committed to a liturgic service of God, replete with set prayers, incantations, and incense, and fundamentalist preachers who view high church liturgy as a demonic invention. There are liberal Methodists, political activists intent on transforming society, and Pentecostals who think that society will soon come to a crashing halt with the return of Jesus. And so it goes on. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that there is such a diversity. The creator of everything, the most powerful entity, if stories are to believe, is really, really bad at communicating. Concordance.
So my kids and I went to church this morning, and they were in a program, a play, basically put on by the church. It's a Methodist church. It's a very milquetoast, plain English. There's nothing fancy about it. The religion is not an in-your-face religion, which I thought was a softer form of Christianity I could expose my kids to. But the play was based on Jonah and the fish, or Jonah and the whale, depending on which testament you're looking at. And it brought me to reading.
Right?
With the fish and the whale. Of course, the pre-scientific people didn't have a lot of exposure to the whales. They didn't understand the differences in biology. But it's interesting that the word is translated two different ways in two different verses, whether you're looking at Matthew or the book of Jonah. But it struck me that that they're using it. They're taking this story and they are warping the bejesus out of it until it's meant to be a morality tale about taking responsibility for your actions. But if you read it fairly literally, it's a story about a guy who is hearing a voice in his head telling him to go to this particular place and tell people they're going to hell. And going to be destroyed, going to be smited. And he says, I'm not going to do that. And in the end, the sailors on the boat that he's on toss him overboard at his request because he says, oh, I'm being smited by God. And then, of course, the whole point is that Nineveh is such a bad place that God's going to destroy it in 40 days. So he goes as a prophet to tell them they're going to be destroyed. And the king of Nineveh says, wow, this guy is totally right. We need to start fasting and cover ourselves in sackcloth and begin the atonement, because whatever they were doing was so bad that every person in the city deserved to die. But they didn't just do that themselves. They also had their animals fasting and covered with sackcloth. And I thought to myself, what do the animals do? What do the dogs do? What did the camels do? What did the donkeys do that they deserve to be fasting? What does it mean for an animal to be penitent? It's ridiculousness. But of course, all the animals would have been destroyed, I'm sure, except of course because through this act they're all exonerated, they're all forgiven. And then the rest of it is about Jonah being mad that they were spared, right? And that his feelings were inappropriate. His jealousy of God's mercy to these people is somehow inappropriate. But the morality is so confused and bungled, and the actions are so confused and bungled. But what really struck me about it is how imprecise God's justice is. He's willing to sink this boat full of innocent sailors. He's willing to destroy this city full of innocent people. As an allegorical technique, I mean, it certainly tells a story, but the story is horrific to a modern reader. It just really strikes me, if you were a god and you saw 10 sinners and 1,000 innocent people, wouldn't you want to focus on just the sinners? And would you need to strike them down and destroy them utterly? And when do we go from all this smiting business to this gentle, meek God who just wants a relationship with us? That's absolutely not the kind of God that's portrayed here. It's a vengeful, smitey guy.
As we were discussing just before we started going live, there's a wonderful website. If people are not aware of it, I recommend it. Dwindling in Unbelief, and one of the pages there it goes through the entire Bible, counting up how many people God has smited. Just under 25 million people. I mean, some of them are obviously estimates, such as the global flood, Sodom and Gomorrah. But that's quite a lot. It makes Hitler look a little bit pithy, doesn't it?
People are going to accuse us of being too literal. They're going to say, oh, it's just a story. It's just a story. I think the story is atrocious. The story is horrible. Do what God says, or He's going to sink a boat you're on, along with everyone along with you, or the city that you're living in.
I have talked about previously, and it really frustrates me. The global flood was an appalling act, and yet it is celebrated in children's songs and games.
God is he's a thermonuclear weapon, right? It's either destroy everything or spare it, right? The threat of utter destruction is what these people feared back then. Then in Jesus' time, we're talking more about individuals. We're talking more about this sort of philosophical relationship to sin and destruction of the soul, rather than, they were talking about literal destruction. People turned to salt, cities consumed by fire. It reflects, I think, the psychology of the times. And I'm sure someone who was a biblical scholar could analyze the difference in the kind of God that these people wanted to be up in His heaven, watching over things and dispensing justice. And the story of Jonah and the whale or the fish, depending on your view, depending on which scripture we're reading, is shared across Judaic and Islamic and Christian belief systems, but it's ever so slightly altered in each of those three views as to what the story really is meant to be. And you have to wonder, what was the original intent? What was the story really meant to convey 1,000 years ago?
AronRa.
Here's one of my problems with all of this is, I mean, we're talking about, the Word of God. God wants to create this moral guide as a Christian's representative. This is supposed to be a guide for us to live our lives by. And yet, all that it is are haphazard jumble of stories that are all heinous atrocities that support racism, sexism, just all manner of misogyny and slavery and everything else. There's not anything remotely moral that I can find in this. There's no guide to how we should live our lives. If you follow any of the suggestions, or if you try to live like any of the stories that you get in the Bible, you're going to find yourself incarcerated on felony charges very, very quickly, and rightly so. I mean, I ask Christians often about, why don't you see somebody working on Sunday? Why don't you kill them as you are compelled to do? I mean, are you more moral than your Bible is? And a lot of the people, I don't know. I don't know if that they read between the lines and maybe want the story to say what it actually doesn't say. Maybe that's what's happening. They're reading between the lines instead of reading the lines itself. But if you were a God, I mean, seriously, if you were a God and you decided for whatever reason that you were not going to be material, you're not going to be present, you're not going to be perceptible, you're going to be this thing that demands for whatever reason that people have to pretend to hear your voice rather than actually seeing or hearing you, and you're going to write a book to tell these people how to live their lives, are you going to include any of the nonsense that you've got in the Bible? Really? Any of that? And no useful information is in there either. I mean, the only thing that you've got that you put in there for how space is, or how the true nature of the earth, and none of that. Everything is described that the earth is flat, and there's this firmament that doesn't really exist, and the stars have personalities, and they can come down to this planet and intermingle with people, and then it's absolutely retarded. On the face of it, I can't understand how anybody can pretend to take any of this seriously.
Well, the Odyssey or the Iliad are also mythos. I mean, there's as much morality in Aesop's fables as there is in the Bible, and I think Aesop's fables are interesting to read. I think the Iliad and the Odyssey are interesting to read. But there's not a group of people that are looking to take, the Cyclops and find what it truly means. You can take moral stories, but the problem is you've got this mixture of prehistorical accounts, history basically, mixed in with the mythos, and they're not clearly delineated, as though we were to accept this whole story. I'm often challenged by people who are very sophisticated Christians, very liberal, very informed by multiple strains of thought, and they're very sharp people, and it's wrong, I think, to dismiss their viewpoints. But there are also the other 90% or 95% of them that are trying to figure out what kind of a fish actually could swallow Jonah. They're doing the physics of it. They're trying to shoehorn the science into the mythology. I'm literally serious here. There's commentary in one of the Bible Gateway sites that I looked up the book of Jonah on what kind of whale it could have been, or what kind of fish. The general consensus is that it was probably a great white whale, because that's the only known fish that can be capable of swallowing a man whole.
Okay,
but of course,
so you mean great white shark?
Sorry, great white shark. And then the alternative theory was, I believe, a sperm whale, if we were going to go with the whale. But of course, none of these animals has sufficient space inside for a human being to live in for 3 days. So it's an impossible task. It creates ridiculous conflict, though, between someone accepting that this is at best mythology.
Yeah, well, don't discount the sperm whale, because I've seen Pinocchio. I know they can do it.
You mean the historical document of Pinocchio?
Well, there was a movie about it. There were people named Geppetto, I'm sure. So there's all the justification you need.
Yeah. It's an illusion. It's not an illusion. It's an allegory.
Yeah, well,
then you have the difficulty, do you not, if it is an allegory, of identifying which parts of the Bible are allegories and which parts are true. And
But
I've
Bill
asked that
believes-
question of many theists and never had a satisfactory answer to that question.
Well, consider the contrast between what was going on in Nineveh and what people talk about after every tsunami and every hurricane and every natural catastrophe. People say this is God's wrath for our lack of respect for him. Well, why wouldn't they think that? If they accept these mythological descriptions as true narratives, then they would expect that every time a natural disaster happens, it's because we're being punished. It's because someone isn't doing what they were supposed to do. That's the kind of God that's in the Bible. It is completely consistent for someone to say, aha, New Orleans was flooded because of all the homosexuals there. That's the kind of message that you absolutely can take from the Bible. It's there. It's written very plainly that's the kind of thing that God does.
I'm not putting up with
I
that.
think that just picking up on Concordance's last point and what you were saying, Aaron, I mean, this is something that Dawkins has identified and expressed very clearly. People go through the Bible and they cherry pick the good bits or the bits that they like. And in doing so, they are using some basis which is external to the Bible. Wherever their morality comes from, and whenever they look at the Bible and think, well, this is a good bit, they're using something external to the Bible.
Can I bring
Go
this
ahead.
around? This discussion of morality from the Bible, specifically, what is biblical? What are the biblical lessons we can take? I don't know if you guys went over this last week, but the whole Chick-fil-A, DPR, I don't know, did this hit your news? Chick-fil-A versus the great culture war clash that was played out at Chick-fil-A?
It didn't. I'm aware of it, but perhaps for the benefit of the global audience that we have, perhaps you'd like to give us the background to it.
I believe is it Dan Cathy made what looked to be a very idle comment. He is a deeply religious person and the head of the Chick-fil-A organization. I believe he's CEO or COO. And
Chick-fil-A is a chicken restaurant for those who don't know.
It's a chicken restaurant. Sorry, it's a chicken fillet sandwich kind of restaurant, fast food. They're fairly popular. They're closed on Sundays. They have very clear biblical guidelines to their company. It's an openly religious company, but it's also damn good chicken. And he made a comment basically that he against gay marriage, that we shouldn't try to redefine marriage as God has defined it in the Bible. If we think we know better than him, we're inviting his judgment. And of course, this was interpreted as a strong stance against gay marriage, and there was call of protest. And of course, all the Republican and conservative Christians did a counter protest on August 1st, where they all went in, and it was a big political thing on the internet.
Aren't you missing something important and key here? He didn't just make this passive statement. He also donated money to, and I'm taking this report, I know that I'm going to get details wrong on this, but he made donations to an African government that was trying to promote a law to exterminate homosexuals.
I know he donated $2 million to what they were calling hate groups, but I never quite got the mission. So you're saying one of those countries where homosexuality is legal.
Right. That was the source of the whole problem, is that he advocates the execution of homosexuals. Which
I'm going to set that
absolutely
aside.
outrageous.
As a much more serious issue. Let's set that to the left for the moment.
Well, you can't set it to the left. No, that's right. You put that to the right.
Okay, set it to the right. What strikes me though is he's talking about the biblical definition of marriage, and if you read the Bible, I mean, other than all the other things that are in there that are at the same level as the abhorrence of homosexuality. There's all the things like wearing mixed fabrics and eating shellfish, all those kinds of things. But the definition of marriage in the Bible is, polygamy. It's polygamy, and it's
it's also incestuous.
Incestuous and murder and divine conception, and so you have all these sort of Mary was a single mother. There are all these redefinitions of marriage, but he's chosen one in particular that has survived the years as becoming the biblical quote-unquote definition of marriage.
Yeah, I have to do a small shout-out on this. Betty Bowers did a fantastic video on the biblical definition of marriage. Anybody that hasn't seen it should go see that. Go ahead.
But I mean, that to me is the amusing aspect of the whole thing. Is if you're talking about we shouldn't redefine marriage, then we should stick with our polygamy. You know, we should have multiple wives and concubines, and handmaidens can be
by the hundreds.
By hundreds, if you can afford it. I can't
it's funny.
Wife.
I gave this speech in Illinois, and this one girl was outraged that she said that the Bible was not misogynistic, and I was doing my best to be very, very polite to her. What I could have said, and maybe I should have said, was when you live in biblical times and you suspect that your husband may be sleeping with another woman, how would you know? You would know because there would be a brand new 13-year-old in your bed every night.
Right.
That's how you would know in biblical times. Now, if, on the reverse, you're a man and you suspect your wife is cheating on you, how would you know? You take her down to the priest, and they would force her to have force her to drink some bile potion that would cause her to have an abortion. And if she did, then she was cheating. So how is that not misogynistic? That's a guy can have. What are the limits? I mean, he's got these wives, multiple, and then he's got concubines, and then he's got handmaidens, and he's got his brother's sister, and then he's got his own sister on occasion. It doesn't seem to matter. If it has an orifice, it's his. Seems to be the rule. Oh, except for guys. I'm sorry, I stole your show. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that's the point, though, is that the idea of the one man, one woman for the rest of their lives does not really seem to derive from the Bible. It seems to be a fairly recent cultural innovation.
Again, it goes back to, well, it's not even cherry picking on this occasion. What do either of you make of the argument that is sometimes advanced by the theists to explain the difference in God's behavior from the Old Testament to the New Testament because Jesus fulfilled the sacrificial law? Do you think there's any weight in that argument?
I don't even see a dramatic difference. I mean, Jesus, in my perspective, and I have to preface this too, I mean, my perspective is going to be different than the interpretation that people are told they have to have. I wasn't told that I have to interpret the passages any particular way. I read them, I interpret them freely. This is what I get out of it. Jesus, at one point, he seems to be promoting himself as this conduit for God. I mean, in one instance, he's saying that I am one with the Father in the same way that we are all one in our message, and every one of you can do all of the miraculous things that I can do. We can all do miracles if you but believe. So he's one of the people in one instance, and then later on, he posits himself as the sole conduit of God. He's the foreman. He's the gatekeeper of God. You can't get to Father but through me, which is very much like what Akhenaten did. And then there's other interpretations where Jesus is supposedly saying that he is God, which I've never been able to get that. And Matt Dillahunty says that if you understood the context of these passages, there's only this one interpretation, but I don't get that. I don't get that Jesus is saying that he is Yahweh. I see Jesus as being more peaceful than Yahweh in one instance or at one time, and then later, and this is not actually Jesus talking, so that might make a whole difference. We have in Revelations and other places where Jesus is being represented as saying these things that he never actually said, like in the Gospels. He didn't. None of this is from the Gospels. This is from later books, where Jesus is suddenly talking about all the terrible tortures that he's going to do to all the people that don't believe in him, and so he goes right back to being what the Old Testament God was. He's going to be taking all the unbelievers and forcing them through this bloody winepress to punish them for not believing impossible nonsense for no good reason, which apparently is the only criteria required for redemption.
Well, I just want to say, before we move on to our first caller, I was rereading Matthew the other day, and I came across the passage which I think you referred to a couple of shows ago, that Jesus, there's a part where I'm just looking for the Bible because I had it flagged up. There's a part where he says that he's not come to bring peace. He's come to cause trouble, cause fights between father and son and the likes.
Exactly.
You recall the passage I'm referring to?
I do. It's 5:17, and I'll read it to you real quick.
It's not 5:17. 5:17
well, it is. Think
is,
not that I am come to destroy the law.
law.
Yeah, here it is. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophet. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill.
Yeah, there's hang on.
There's also the one jot. Not one jot of the law will be changed. But that's beside the point as well. If the law has been suspended, then if the kosher law no longer applies to Christians, then why does the commandment against homosexuality? Why do all the commandments that we're so worried about still apply? But the ones that we don't want, that are inconvenient, we can set aside because Jesus.
Well, I don't know. I'm sorry. I found the passage. If I may quickly read it, it's actually Matthew 10:34. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. This is what sometimes you just got to laugh. Why do they go into this sort of detail? A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy that's the passage I'm talking about. I mean, that's pretty offensive, isn't it? I'm not come to bring peace but a sword. This is the loving Jesus, meek and mild.
Well, I believe we got another passage where it says that you actually have to hate your own brother to be worthy of Jesus. And then, of course, there's a wonderful paradox where later on it says that whoever hates his own brother is guilty of murder. For being a hater is the same thing as murder. I guess the crimes of the mind that you have already sinned or whatever. And then, of course, all murderers are going to go to hell. So if you want to follow Jesus, you have to hate your own brother, which makes you a murderer, which makes you go to hell. So follow Jesus and go to hell.
ADT, welcome to the show.
Hello again. All coming through?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. I'll just continue on for a little bit, actually. If you believe in an omnibenevolent God and also a God who's the author of morality, then I can actually show that the Bible's inaccurate. You can't trust the Bible's context in this modern day. Yeah, I'm just going to say that. If you believe in
go
God,
ahead, yes.
I can do it if you like. It's a bit early in the morning, but essentially it goes like something like this. If God is omnibenevolent, it means he's all good and all perfect. If he's the author of morality, then it means he can write his own moral laws, and to be omnibenevolent, he must follow these moral laws. There are contradictions in the Bible, we know that, where God can be good in one circumstance and still be good doing the opposite thing. And you ask, if God's omnibenevolent, how can this be possible? How can he still be all good and all perfect if he's changing his morality? And the answer is, well, he can. He is the author of morality, so he's allowed to change his morality in order to make sure he's omnibenevolent. Now, if this is the case and he's actually changing his morality, how do we know that the morality that's in the Bible is still reflective of the modern day? It's just inaccurate. You don't know.
Well, here's the thing. They always want to say that it's an objective moral standard, when clearly, by your own description, it is a subjective moral standard. What I have to tell people is if this is God writing the morals, then it is God's subjective moral standard. It's not objective, because objective would mean that we would all be able to verify it.
Well, it's entirely subjective.
Yes, I mean, sorry, do go on.
Yeah, it's just, I was going to say, it's inaccurate. What's written in the Bible, we can't trust whether it's our morality at this time. God could have changed his mind in order to be omnibenevolent.
And if it is objective, then God simply becomes a conduit to tell us what that objective morality is. And again, we've already discussed that he's very bad at communicating. So we're left in the dark, so to speak. But I don't understand, never have understood the concept of objective morality. Is it woven into the fabric of the universe? I don't know. I can't see how it can be. And even if it is,
you have a God-shaped hole in your heart.
Oh yeah. Sorry, ADT. You had a more a different point. I know.
Yep.
Shall we move on to that?
Sure. Any of you heard of Todd Bentley? Todd Bentley?
Even if we have, which I haven't, I'm sure many of the audience won't, so please explain who he is.
Yes. I only noticed him the other day when I saw a news article on him. He's a Christian evangelist who goes around doing world tours. Essentially, he has healing powers. He's one of those guys. He's a really big guy with a lot of tattoos and ear piercings. He's been in prison, and he's come out, and he has healing powers. And
hold on a second. Is this the guy that kicks little old ladies? Okay.
I think you're going to have to explain a bit more, Aaron, or ADT. Kicking old ladies.
Yeah. I'll do. He kicks people to cure their illnesses. I think the example is he apparently kicked a lady in the head to cure her cancer, and he says that God tells him to kick them in the head. I mean, the question here is, how is he still a Christian? How come the church hasn't, exiled him for this behavior? You say the church says that, yeah, God has told him to kick people in the head to cure them of this sickness. It's ridiculous. Where does the responsibility of the church lie in this?
It's a good question. I'll come on to the responsibility of the church, but again, this was an issue that people may remember Raw from the last show. I spoke to him again a couple of days ago, and I asked him again how he knows that he's hearing the word of God. Much like we asked Sari ten Bruggencate, how does he know that he's hearing the word of God and got the right message? And the answers that both of them give, I think, are pathetic. I mean, that
I just know, or he can tell me in a way that I can know, right?
Yeah. Responsibility of the church. I mean, I would love to see the church speak out more strongly against the likes of the person you've just mentioned and the likes of Popoff, Benny Hinn, and so on. They don't, and I think that maybe one of the reasons is that the religious are really quite defensive, and when they're attacked, they manage to group together, even though they have got huge differences. And it's a sort of protection method that they have. I don't know. That's the best explanation I can give. AronRa.
What you've got there is a system of delusion where it's manifest. They know that they are pretending. If they were really interested in truth, you would be able to get a Catholic priest and an imam and a Buddhist, and you would be able to get them to work out what evidence they actually had in support of their different theories. And each one would be able to give that maybe they were wrong about some aspect, but maybe the Buddhists were right in some other thing. And then they would be able to give and take and define what the truth is. They would follow a scientific process, but they don't. They want to believe what they want to believe because they want to believe it, because reality scares them and they want to make up something else. And that literally is what it is. It is a matter of pretend. Not everybody realizes that they're pretending, but on some level, a lot of people do. And so when you have somebody that's threatening the whole pretend thing, the whole concept of assuming your own reality and manufacturing out of nothing, that's when they group together, because they have to preserve the delusion. It doesn't even matter what the delusion is at that point. They have to preserve their pretend. Their clap your hands if you want Tinkerbell to live. That's what the whole thing is about. Hand me that.
ADT, is there any footage on YouTube of this person kicking old women in the head?
I was searching for some. I haven't found any yet.
If there is, I will add it as a in the description when these videos are, subsequently posted on YouTube. Concordance, did you want to make any other points on this?
No, it's interesting, the sociology that goes into the beliefs because of the reinforcement. Because once you're so deeply invested in it, you grow up in it, for it to suddenly not be true is such a difficult hurdle for people to get over. And it leads to denialism. Whatever you're confronted with the reality of the situation, your mind has to adapt. It has to find some path through to avoid that very painful realization. And I think a lot of non-believers talk about that moment when they suddenly realize that sort of non-religious epiphany where people suddenly say, wait, this is crap. I don't believe this anymore. And it's a moment where you have a profound experience. It's an anti-religious epiphany. And these people that do this, you have to wonder, if you interviewed them 2 weeks later, what their recollection would be of the events in question, of being kicked in the head. Wait, I still have to go back for my cancer treatment, or my cancer came back, right? Oh, it must have come back because my faith faltered, or this is God's plan for me. I need to accept this. There's so many mechanisms in place to prevent us from going against the grain, realizing our own mistakes. It feels better to be unknowingly wrong than knowingly wrong.
Can I throw this out to all of you? These people appear to be, or a lot of them appear to be genuine when they say that they have felt the presence of God or heard God's voice. Do you think that they are being genuine, or do you think they're being dishonest?
I can tell you that I've read people's comments from different religious perspectives. I mean, I remember reading back in like 1980, some girl was talking about the extreme euphoria that she felt and how all of her problems seemed to be alleviated when she prayed and invited Buddha into her heart. And it doesn't matter what name you put to the imaginary friend. It doesn't matter what the mythology goes along with it. You have the imaginary friend with the incredible powers who answers prayers and can make reality not be real. And you can deny whatever ultimate doom faces you. And whatever reality is too great for you to deal with, if you can't deal with it and you can't be responsible for it and there's nothing you can do, you can wish that it would be different. And maybe it will be.
I mean, I was talking to one guy the other day, and he claimed he was Christian, but he had quite different beliefs. He believed in a everlasting society of true friends, and I talked to him about his beliefs, and he didn't believe a lot of the things that the Christians did. He was okay with homosexuality. He thought we all had free will. He thought he had a sort of different concept of dualism as well. And I told him, why do you believe in Christianity? Why do you have to tag, the downfalls of Christianity along with your belief? Because his belief was wonderful. He was a fantastic person. He had fantastic beliefs. And if all Christians believed what he believed, the world would be a better place. So,
there's a member of the House of Lords called Richard Harries. He was the former Bishop of Oxford. An Anglican, and his views are incredibly liberal, very similar to what you're talking about. And I don't know whether he's a friend of Dawkins, but he certainly appeared on some programs that Dawkins has presented. And they had this very discussion, and Dawkins asked him, well, you sound so liberal, it's almost like you don't need a God at all. And I wish I could remember accurately what his answer was, but he did have an answer to it. He did think that there was some purpose in having behind his faith, but what he believed in, again going back to what the Bible says, it bared no reflection at all on Bible teachings. So I'm as confused as you are.
I used to work for a Swedish company. I spent quite a bit of time in Sweden, and they're a very non-theistic country, but that's not to say that they're actually non-believers. They don't call themselves atheists. I'm a spiritual person, and they think of these sort of vague connections with, a higher power of some sort, whatever name they may give it. There's probably a lot of people like that out there who can't bring themselves to reject this sort of nagging feeling that there's something out there that's bigger than us, but at the same time they don't believe. They read the Bible, and that moves them further away from formalized religion. There's a lot of informal spirituality, I think, that fills a gap for people that keeps them from calling themselves atheists, because they still believe in some form of the supernatural.
I have to tell you that most of my friends, most of them, fall into that category. I mean, my oldest and dearest friends have made comments like that to me. I mean, one of them, for example, said that I cannot be an atheist because I can't be absolutely certain that a God is impossible to exist. And I have to explain that's not what atheism is. If you're not convinced there is a God, then you are an atheist. And he says, but I'm not convinced there's not a God either. And he won't make the disassociation. The best I'm able to get out of him was that he said, I believe there is something. And that's it. Okay, fine. I believe there is something too. And it's probably not a God. So I'm an atheist and you're an atheist too, but he will not take that label. Won't. He wants to be spiritual. He wants to believe in a higher power. He doesn't believe in anything supernatural so far as I know. He is very clearly and unambiguously atheist to everyone, it seems, but him.
Now, see, I believe that's the fastest growing group of religious people. I think that's the battleground group where something inevitably comes into their lives to give them a sort of voice. That's where groups like Mormons and Scientology, newer religions that are more aggressively growing, Islam, are recruiting most heavily. I believe, and this is not based on any studies or evidence, but I know an awful lot of people who have rejected formalized religion and are just sort of out there looking for something that they find explanatory. The Deepak Chopra religious people, you know, the ones who believe that they put something out there and the universe is going to send it back. They're not Bible thumpers, but in some cases they're still religious, and all that faith, all that religious feeling has to be put into something. And in some cases it's New Age mysticism or paganism or Wiccan or whatever it is that they have that need that they're trying to fill, or that nagging doubt in the back of their mind that propels them towards one of these newer, more aggressive, more liberal type of belief systems.
I have to add something else to that, too. I would have said this a few times here recently, but I know atheists who, again, they don't want to call themselves atheists. Maybe they object to that title. They will openly say that I'm not an atheist, I just don't believe in gods. Something like that, right? Defining themselves as atheists, but they refuse to adopt that label. Neither are they atheists for any reason I can respect, because they're not skeptics. Okay, they didn't come by their atheism through skeptical analysis of anything. Instead, they believe in homeopathy, and they believe in spiritual healing, and they believe that if you focus your thoughts and your concentration on some aspect of the universe enough, that you can actually cause physical reality to change according to your will, mind over matter. I know people that are like this. They've rejected religion entirely. They've even rejected the concept of gods, but they still think they have this mind over matter capability somehow.
I think that's a lot better sense than to believe in a religion, honestly, or to believe in a god. Because at least that's a bit more in line with modern science. You know, you may not be able to, infect anything by thinking about it hard, but it's better than believing. Oh, you never know. Have you heard of Secrets of the Universe?
No.
No. I'll send a link through a bit later on, but yeah, so essentially, it's probably a better thing than religion. I prefer someone who believes they can modify something physically by thinking about it than someone who believes an all-powerful God exists in the universe.
Really? Now, how is that different from someone believing they can cure their cancer through prayer? Because that's the expression of a lot of this New Age mysticism, is they honestly believe they don't need to go in for cancer treatment because they have their chakras opened. I know a woman, I work with her, who had gallstones, and she said, well, I went and the Reiki guy, changed my energy, and I haven't had gallstones ever since. And you just know that in 5 years she's going to be under surgery. She's going to have to deal with it. The other beliefs, the non-religious spirituality or the New Age mysticism kind of people, I think are the same. I think you would be hard-pressed to distinguish them from the same kinds of harmful effects. You can't eat anything that's green. I mean, they come up with weird rules. They come up with weird cultural practices, and they justify that, even though it's a very vague kind of nebulous belief system, it still affects the way the person views the world and how they act on a daily basis. There's still physical consequences for their mental process.
Yeah, but even if, like, I do agree it's the same sort of harm, but at least if you don't have some all-powerful God attached to it, you can do some observations and you can prove them wrong. It's a more practical thing to justify.
Well, the problem is that it's not a matter of whether they hold to a set of collective dogmas to qualify as a religion. They're not thinking in a scientific perspective. They're not thinking skeptically. They're not thinking analytically. They may not be thinking dogmatically, but they're still believing in that whole faith-based thing where if you just force yourself to believe hard enough, believing hard enough can change reality. And there's just nothing to support that.
That's specifically why I prefer the term skeptic or rationalist. It's not so much the fact that I don't have a belief in a God. It's much more important to me to emphasize to other people how I got there, the process I use to arrive at those conclusions. And I don't care if you continue to believe in Buddha or the Hindu faith or whatever. If you go to church on Sundays like I sometimes do, all that matters to me is that you're applying critical thinking, skepticism, that you reject hopeful, wishful thinking in favor of empirical observation or reality as we can perceive it. That to me is much more important. The process of gaining knowledge, gaining true knowledge, rather than wishful and hopeful thinking that leads us down these back alleys away from reality and living in a world that doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I want to also add a note on here about what you say about true knowledge. It's not like we have the no true Scotsman thing. I mean, when he says true knowledge, he means knowledge that literally is that. Whereas other people will say that I know, that I know, that I know, that I know, that I know there's a God. But of course, saying that you know that is not the same thing as actually knowing it, and there is a definitive difference. Knowledge is measurable with a demonstrable level of accuracy. There is ways that you can test your knowledge to see how accurate it is. And I have to remind people of that. And when I come across religious believers, they don't want any part of that because subjective impressions, their own convictions, count as physical evidence as far as they're concerned.
As a species, we are so easy to fool. We fool ourselves all the time, and on a diverse range of topics. And it's the person who has learned to be self-critical, I think, that ultimately ends up being less deluded. I know I'm deluded about things. I know that there are things that I'm probably not entirely unbiased. But a recognition of that and a commitment not to delude myself, a commitment to seek out the truth, even when it's painful, to admit to being wrong when I'm wrong. Those things, those commitments, those conscious efforts are so much more important to me than the conclusions that I have arrived at. And that's why I would love for my mission, my work on the internet to mostly be about the processes that we should all be using, our ability to prevent ourselves from self-delusion.
And I have to back up what he said completely. I'm so totally involved in that mindset. It doesn't matter what you believe, and I say this a lot too. All that matters is why you believe it. And if you expect anybody else to believe it, you're going to have to provide a reason for it. And from my own perspective, I have never advanced so much as when I've discovered some prejudice or some bias that I didn't even know that I had. And I have to acknowledge that, maybe minimize it, work past it, admit that I've made an error, reconfigure my perspective according to new data, and move on, and thus improve. Go ahead.
Just on the topic of knowledge, from epistemology, what knowledge actually is to have knowledge. To know something, you need to satisfy 3 criteria. So the first one's belief, the second one's justification, and the third one is it has to be true. So essentially what you just said, but it's just in a more defined manner. You need to have all 3 of those justifications. And in the past, there have been people who say that they know something, like I know the world is flat, but they never really knew it. So And you have to ask the question, do we really know anything today? I mean, some things, as you said, that we can measure and we can observe, and in that way they are sort of truths.
Well, I want to answer that
question.
I want to answer that question again, too, because for a long time we've been very, very generous about what we can and cannot know. And we realize the hypothetical situation that, let's say Satan is the Lord of lies. He could be lying about every element of our reality. We could all be elements of the dream of Brahma, and reality might not exist at all. This could all be a computer-enhanced hallucination, and maybe reality isn't real. But the thing is, even if this is a video game, the rules still apply to us. The reality still applies to us. Reality is still real from our perspective. So when you talk about what we can really know, we can really know things within this reality that we have. It is still real regardless of, even if it was an illusion, there's still aspects of it that are real from our perspective. So reality is real. That part of the argument is now moved. Within that reality, we can verify through objective analysis of evidence. We don't have a circular argument using your reasoning to justify your reasoning. We can know for sure that some things are real and some things are false.
Oh, can I just go back? You mentioned Cy ten Bruggencate, and he uses that argument. How can you use your reason to justify your reason? How can you know anything? It's self-defeating, though, isn't it? Because cannot the same argument be thrown back at him? And his only response is, well, it's been to reveal to me in a way such that I know it is true, which I think is particularly unconvincing. There's no other response he has, is there? AronRa?
Don't call me that. And somebody else, Mr. Atheist guy, just mentioned there are no chairs. Yes, here's another thing about disassociation of reality and the denial of reality. When I went to this local church, and I'm trying to get these people pinned down on any fact, of whether you can know anything for sure, I said, well, okay, we're in this room. There's all these chairs. Are there chairs in this room? How would you know? And he would not answer the question, yes or no, are there chairs? He would only give me what David Hume says, or some philosophical excuse. He said I was using totalizing statements, whatever the hell that means. And that was his art. He wouldn't answer the question. They have to be able to avoid reality being imposed on them in any way that they don't want to have to accept.
Talking about not answering the question, ADT's original question was, why don't the church or religious organizations speak out more strongly against people who kick women in the head and Peter Popoff and the like? I don't think we ever really managed to answer that. But ADT, I think I'm going to have to move on. I've got a few people lined up, but thank you very much indeed for the call. And if we do have any ideas, or if anyone wants to comment on that, send a Skype contact request to Magic Sandwich Show, and we'll see if we can get you on the show. Concordance, I'll take you next, but ADT, thank you very much.
I have a toss-away line. It's the same reason lawyers don't sue each other.
I'll claim my right under the Fifth Amendment.